So, good evening. So tonight we have the prayer sheet, little prayers, so we can do the prayers together. Those who wish to. Again, it's optional. If you don't wish to do prayers, you can just sit and meditate. But the idea of the prayers is to help us remember why we're here, what is the purpose of coming together like this. Basically, it's to work on our mind, try to bring about a positive transformation of our mind, to have more positive thoughts, feelings, attitudes, such as love and compassion and patience and wisdom, to be of benefit to others as much as we can and not harm others. And then in a long-term sense, some of you anyway, might feel comfortable with the idea of becoming a Buddha, becoming enlightened, following in the footsteps of the Buddha, reaching the state of enlightenment, to be of the greatest possible benefit to all other beings. So the prayers express these kind of thoughts and attitudes, so it's a way of helping us to bring them into our mind. Okay, so the first one is refuge and bodhicitta. So let's recite that 3 times. We'll do it in English this time. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then the 4 immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. The next prayer is called the 7-limb prayer, and if you're not familiar with this, it's a condensation of 7 different practices that are done for accumulating positive energy and purifying our body, speech, and mind of any negative energy that we might have. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So then I included this prayer and mantra of the Buddha. Some of you may have attended the teachings that were given last year in July by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He actually gave the Medicine Buddha initiation, but he gave a talk beforehand. And he mentioned this, this prayer and mantra related to the Buddha. And he said that just reciting this even one time purifies eons of negative karma and defilements, obscuration, so negative things in our mind. So I thought it might be nice to recite that. So let's just recite. It's in Tibetan. The first part is in Tibetan. The mantra is in Sanskrit. So let's recite the prayer one time, and then the mantra we can recite a few times. So there's a kind of little bit of a way of chanting it. We can do it that way. Lama tumba chomden de deshin shekpa dra chomba yang takpa zokpe sangye pal gyalwa shakya tupala chak salo chuto kyapsu chiwu. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Muni 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 Soha. Okay, so let's just sit quietly for a few more minutes, and you can just focus on your breath, calm down your mind, or you can contemplate more on the motivation for being here. Trying to generate the wish that what we will do here tonight, what we will learn here tonight, will be beneficial to ourselves and to all other people, all other beings, to the whole world. Okay, so so the class we're having here tonight is a continuation of a class that we started a couple of weeks ago, and it's part of a program we're calling Exploring Buddhist Philosophy, and we're on the first module of that program, the Buddha and his teachings. So we started a few weeks ago looking at the Buddha's life and then his first teaching, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, as it's called. And then last class, we started going into more depth, more detail with the main subject matter of the Buddha's first teachings, which was the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths is like a really core, essential teaching within Buddhism. And it's quite useful to have an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, because then it gives us an understanding of the overall message of the Buddha. And all the other teachings that he gave, we can understand them in the context of the Four Noble Truths. So last week I started going into the first of the Four Noble Truths, which is the truth of suffering. And I'm just briefly reviewing what I covered so far, and how this has three phases. In the sutra, the Buddha spoke about each of the Four Noble Truths in terms of three phases or three aspects. And of these, probably the second is the most important. That is what we need to do in relation to each of the four truths. How do we deal with it? How do we relate to it? How do we practice it? And so with regard to the truth of suffering, what the Buddha said was that suffering is to be known. We need to know suffering. We need to understand suffering. And so in the Tibetan tradition, at least as I have learned it from my teachers, what we do with this topic of suffering is to look at many, many different types of suffering, such as the 8 types of suffering, and then there's a list of 6 types of suffering, and then there's 3 types of suffering. So there's these different lists. But what we need to do really is to contemplate these different types of suffering and try to see how they do exist in our own life and in the lives of other people in the world or around us. And the purpose of doing this kind of contemplation is so that we come to understand that the situation that we are in is not at all perfect and ideal. It's full of problems and faults, and the reason for coming to that understanding isn't so we get depressed, but it's so that we generate the wish to get out of this situation, to free ourselves from the situation. So if we don't recognize the problems, the shortcomings, the disadvantages of our unenlightened state of existence, then we won't want to get out of this situation and get ourselves to the state of liberation, the state of enlightenment. So it's to motivate us to strive for these higher states of mind. Okay, so then last Saturday I was in Helsinki, and I gave a full day. It was like a little retreat, a mini retreat, continuing this topic. So I don't know if any of you watched the videos of that. And anyway, they're still there, I think, on the channel. You can watch them later if you want to. So so I continued talking about the truth of suffering. We did a meditation on the 8 types of suffering. And then I also went into an explanation of the 3 types of suffering and the 4 aspects of, so each of the 4 Noble Truths can also be explained in terms of what are called 4 aspects. I'm not sure if that kind of teaching exists in the Theravada tradition, but it's in the Mahayana tradition. So with regard to the truth of suffering, the first noble truth, the 4 aspects are, first impermanence, meaning change. Things are changing all the time, every minute, every second, every nanosecond. Nothing stays the same from one moment to the next, but everything, our bodies, our minds, all the people and all the things in the world around us. So all of these things are impermanent. They don't last. They don't stay stable and firm and like frozen, but they're constantly moving, constantly changing. And impermanence doesn't necessarily imply suffering, but in many cases it does, because, for example, most people, like to have their bodies young and beautiful and healthy, and don't really want to grow old and experience the various changes that happen as we grow old. But without choice, this is what happens. We can't keep ourselves young. Of course, you can have all these different products and treatments and plastic surgery and so forth to try to hide the signs of aging, but sooner or later, you can't do that anymore. And the aging of the body just, is a reality, is a truth. And another aspect of impermanence is that things don't last forever. So not only do they change moment by moment by moment, but they also go out of existence. And that also usually leads to unhappiness, to suffering, because when there are people we love, people we care about, we want them to be there forever, but that isn't what happens. So everyone dies, and we ourselves will die. And so that also leads to suffering in most cases. But on the other hand, impermanence, there's a kind of positive side of impermanence, and that is that if things were not subject to change, we wouldn't be able to change ourselves. We would be stuck the way we are. And so that's the good thing, the fact that now we're in an unenlightened situation. We have problems, we have suffering, we have delusions, we have karma, but we can change ourselves. That's definitely possible. We can work on our mind. Mainly it means working on our mind, transform our mind, get rid of the negative aspects, the ones that lead to suffering, and develop the positive ones, and eventually reach the state of enlightenment. So if we weren't impermanent, if our mind wasn't impermanent, that wouldn't be possible. We would be stuck the way we are. So there's good things about impermanence, and also the fact that suffering is impermanent. It's not going to be there forever. It comes to an end. And then the second aspect of true sufferings, the truth of suffering, is suffering, just suffering, and that means that as long as we're in this situation of being unenlightened, being subject to suffering, then we continue to experience suffering again and again and again. Sometimes we have pleasure and happiness and good experiences, but those don't last. And in fact, those are considered another type of suffering because they don't last. So the pleasant experiences that we have are momentary, are transitory, they're ephemeral, they're like a rainbow, like a dream. They're there, but then eventually they're gone, they pass. So this is like, a situation of experiencing problems and difficulties again and again and again. And then the third aspect of the truth of suffering is emptiness. Now, the term emptiness can have different meanings in different contexts. In terms of Madhyamika philosophy, especially the Prasangika Madhyamika, it refers to the absence of inherent or independent existence, which is said to be the true nature of everything. Everything is empty of intrinsic, inherent, independent existence. And that's the true nature of things. However, we don't see things that way. So we actually see things as the opposite of that. We see things as if they're real and solid and existing from their own side, and don't see that they're actually empty of that mode of existence. So that's the usual meaning of emptiness. You probably heard that before if you've been coming to Tibetan Buddhist teachings for a while. However, in this context, in the context of these four aspects of true suffering, here the term emptiness is explained differently. It's emptiness of a certain type of self. So, each one of us is a person. We are a human being, and we do exist, but there are different levels in which we have a wrong idea of ourself, or who we are, what we are, how we exist. Yeah, so this is a very important concept in Buddhism called selflessness, the absence of a self. And there's actually different levels, different layers of selflessness. One of these, which is the more coarse or gross level of selflessness, is the absence of a self that is permanent, meaning unchanging, that is unitary, not made of parts, but just one whole thing, and independent, meaning independent of our aggregates, our body and mind. So a self that has those three qualities of permanence, unitariness, wholeness, and independence of the aggregates. This kind of self is actually believed in or asserted by other philosophical systems. So at the time of the Buddha, before the Buddha, and at the time of the Buddha, and even now in India, there are religious and philosophical systems that believe in this kind of a self. Sometimes it's called Atman or soul. So this is actually part of their belief system. They think that there is something inside of us that's an Atman or a soul, and it has these qualities. It's permanent and unchanging. It's whole, unitary, not made of parts, and it's independent of our body and mind. So when we die, this Atman, this soul, continues to exist, and it takes rebirth. So the Buddha knew about this view of a self, but when he practiced meditation and looked into his own mind, his experience, and tried to understand what was the cause of suffering, where did suffering come from, he came to see that believing in that type of self is actually a cause of suffering. If you believe that you have such a self or a soul or Atman, then that is a cause of suffering. And so he rejected or discarded that kind of view, and realized that actually such a thing doesn't exist. It's only fabricated by the mind. It's only invented by the mind, but it's not really there. It doesn't really exist. So this is one thing that sets Buddhism apart from other religions and philosophical traditions, which do believe in such a self. Buddhism says, no, that kind of self doesn't exist. But this is something we have to investigate for ourselves. Buddha always said, don't just believe what I say, you investigate for yourself to see what is true. So we have to go through our own analysis, our own investigation to see if that kind of self exists in us or not. But anyway, that's part of the Buddhist system. The Buddhist path is to say that that kind of self doesn't exist, and that's the meaning of emptiness here. And then the fourth aspect of true sufferings, the truth of suffering, is selflessness. And here, the term selflessness refers to a somewhat subtler kind of self. Now, the previous one, the one I was talking about just now, the belief in a permanent, unitary, independent self, that idea is only philosophically acquired. In other words, it's not something everybody believes in. It's not innate. It's not intrinsic in everybody. But it's only people who have studied certain philosophical systems in which they are told that they have such a self. Only those people would have that kind of a belief. So it's not an innate or intrinsic one. Whereas this next point, this point of selflessness here, refers to a belief in a self which is innate, intrinsic. It's something that everybody has, whether they've been exposed to a certain philosophical system or not. So here, this type of self, the way it's the terminology is it's a little complicated. It's called a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. It's a lot of words, but basically what it means is that a sense of a self that isn't completely independent of the body and mind. It's not like a separate thing to the body and mind, the aggregates. It's somewhere within our aggregates, but it still has a little bit of an independent existence. It's a little bit able to stand by itself. And the analogy that's used to describe how that kind of self exists in relation to the aggregates is, if you have an office and you have a bunch of people who are salespeople, like maybe they're real estate agents, okay? So there's maybe 10 real estate agents working together in this office, and they're all doing the same work, trying to sell real estate. But there's one who's the boss, who's the head guy or the head woman, yeah. So that person is also a real estate agent, is doing the same work as the others, but still has a little bit of a superior position, is the one who tells the others what to do and gives them their paychecks and so on, something like that. So they say this type of self, the self-sufficient, substantial, existent self, seems like that. It seems to be a self that's existing somewhere in our body and mind, not a totally separate thing, but it has a role of being like a boss, like a director. Yeah, sometimes you might notice this if you watch carefully your experiences. You might catch a sense of an I, a me, an ego inside somewhere that is making the decisions, that's running the whole business of our existence. So that's this kind of self, the self-sufficient, substantial, existent self. It seems to be a boss, a controller, something existing on its own inside of us that's a little bit separate from our body and mind, and it's the boss, the controller. Does that make sense? Anyway, it's something, again, we have to investigate. We have to look into this in our own experience. So again, in Buddhism, that type of self is not really there. It seems to be there. It seems like a real thing, but when we look for it, when we try to analyze it, investigate it, find it, we actually can't. So this is what the Buddha himself experienced, and many others who followed his teachings, the practices he taught, also came to that experience of realizing the absence, the emptiness, the non-existence of that type of self. And so anyway, there's these two levels of selflessness. One is called emptiness, one is called selflessness. And these are the last two of the aspects of the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And here there's actually a kind of connection between, in the Theravada tradition, which some of you may have learned and maybe have attended some retreats. There's a very important practice called Satipatthana, the close placement of mindfulness or foundation of mindfulness. And that's actually the basis of the main type of meditation done in the Theravada tradition. Sometimes it's called Vipassana meditation or insight meditation or mindfulness meditation. But if you attend retreats in that tradition, then you do a lot of meditation practice in which you there are 4 objects that are meditated on: the body, the feelings, the mind, and phenomena. So you go through those 4 and you just try to really pay attention to whatever's happening moment by moment in your body and your feelings and your mind and in phenomena around you. And the real purpose of that type of practice, it's based on a sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra taught by the Buddha. The real purpose of that type of practice is to realize these aspects that we just went through: impermanence, how our body and our mind and all the things around us are changing moment by moment by moment. So we want to come to see that, to experience that directly. Impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, to see that, you know, all these phenomena involved in our unenlightened existence are not really truly satisfying and pleasurable, and in fact there's a lot of suffering here. So to see that directly with our experience. And then in that tradition, they only talk about selflessness. They don't make this distinction between emptiness and selflessness, just selflessness. So one needs to understand that our body and mind, our aggregates, are actually empty of any kind of real self, a real sense of self or I or me, which seems to be there. Yeah, you know, it looks like it's there, but when we look very carefully, we find that it's not there. We find it's emptiness. So anyway, that's the real purpose of mindfulness meditation, is to come to see those aspects of phenomena that are, you know, are part of our self, our life, our world, and so on. So for me personally, I find that the first of these 4 aspects, impermanence, is really, really helpful, really useful in a daily way, you know, in a practical way in one's daily life. Because it's, for one thing, it's easier to understand than emptiness and selflessness. Those are much more difficult. You need a lot more study and meditation to get a sense of those. Whereas impermanence isn't so difficult to understand, and it's also very much validated by Western science, especially physics, quantum mechanics, which also agrees that, you know, all the material things, our bodies and all the things in the world around us, are composed of tiny particles which don't remain the same. They're not like static and frozen, but they're constantly moving and changing. And these tiny particles are what make up everything, you know, all the bigger phenomena, our bodies and buildings and cars and this table and the earth itself and all the, you know, various heavenly bodies floating around. So all of these things are made of these tiny particles, which are constantly moving, constantly changing. And so even though it's not something we can see directly, you know, we can't see these tiny particles and the changes that are happening every moment, but we can intellectually know it. We can't refute it. It's like irrefutable. So it's definitely the way things are. And so to get an understanding of that, and then use that understanding in our daily life. For example, if we get caught up in some disturbing emotion like anger, you know, anger comes up, we feel angry or irritated or annoyed or impatient, you know, and that's a very disturbing state of mind. And if we aren't careful, we could get more into that state of mind and have more suffering and maybe make others suffer too. So contemplating impermanence is a useful way of cooling down our mind. For one thing, you can remember the impermanence of anger itself. It's not permanent. It's not going to last forever. It's something that comes and goes. So that can help to calm down. And then whatever it is you're angry at or about, you know, that's also not permanent. That's impermanent, subject to change. It's there now. It's happening now, but it's not going to go on forever and ever and ever. So remembering that, contemplating that can also help to cool down, calm down. And the same with other disturbing emotions as well. If you have fear or depression or jealousy or strong desire for something, contemplating the impermanence of that state of mind itself, the impermanence of the circumstances that are stirring up these emotions and so on, really, really help to calm down those disturbing thoughts and emotions. Does that make sense? You have to do it. It's like a remedy, an antidote, but the thing is you have to apply it. You have to remember it. Okay, so then I started talking about the second of the Four Noble Truths. Any questions so far? What I've said, what I've talked about up to now? Are there any questions about any of it? Otherwise, I'll carry on. I'll leave time at the end if you have questions. Okay, so then the second of the Four Noble Truths is the truth of origin. And this is talking about the causes of suffering. So why do we suffer? Where does our suffering come from? What are its causes? So this is really important because if we don't know where suffering is coming from, what is causing it, then it's almost impossible to do anything about it. So it's a bit like, for example, if there's every so often there'll be some new disease that appears. Like some years ago, it was SARS. Remember that? SARS. And then last year, or the year before, there was another one. MERS, MERS, Middle Eastern, something or other. They thought it was coming from camels in the Middle East. I don't know. But anyway, every so often, some new disease appears and people get sick. And now, now it's Zika, isn't it? Z-I-C-I-K, Zika. Yeah. So, so when people start to come to hospitals with the symptoms of this disease, and it seems to be a new thing, then everybody is very concerned about finding out where this disease is coming from, you know, tracing its source, its causes. And because if you don't know where it's coming from, what its causes are, then there's not much you can do about it. You're just treating people in the hospital, but you want to be able to stop it at the source to be able to really, you know, get rid of it. So that's what we're doing here, what the Buddha talked about. We need to understand what are the causes, what are the sources, what are the origins of our suffering, so that we can go back to those and eliminate those. And once we can eliminate the causes of suffering, then we can eliminate suffering itself. So basically, well, first of all, let's look at the three phases. So again, as I mentioned before, with each of the four truths, the Buddha spoke about them in terms of these three phases. And so the first phase for all of them, the first phase is just pointing it out. It's just identifying it and saying what its nature is. So in the sutra, what the Buddha said with regard to the origin of suffering, now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving which leads to re-becoming, rebirth, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. So Buddha identify that the source of suffering is craving. So that was the first of the three phases. The second phase is, what do we do about it? How do we deal with it? How do we practice this second noble truth? And what the Buddha said is, this noble truth of the origin of suffering is to be abandoned. So that's what we need to do with the origin of suffering, is to get rid of it, to free ourselves from it, to abandon it. And then third phase is, what is the result of practicing in that way, trying to abandon the origin of suffering? And he said that it gets abandoned. So this is what the Buddha himself did. He was, declaring his own experience. He himself managed to abandon, to free himself from the origin of suffering. And that's the result of the practice. So now you may have heard that before, for example, in the Tibetan tradition, like in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. Usually it's said that the origin of suffering is ignorance. Ignorance is said to be the root, the deepest cause or source of suffering. But here in this sutra, the Buddha is saying craving. So does that mean there's something wrong somewhere? There's a contradiction. One is right and one is wrong? So it seems not, because I once heard the Dalai Lama, when he was teaching, say that ignorance is the root cause of suffering, and craving, which we can also say desire, attachment, is the immediate cause, the direct cause. Because if we didn't have ignorance, we wouldn't have craving. So craving actually arises from ignorance. And so in the Tibetan tradition, actually the Indian and the Tibetan tradition, Mahayana tradition, the explanation is that first there's ignorance, not seeing the true nature of things, being confused, being kind of blind to the way things really exist. So that lies at the core, at the root of our unenlightened existence. And then because our mind is under the influence of ignorance, then we develop these other disturbing emotions, such as attachment or desire or craving for things that we find attractive and interesting and appealing. We want them, we crave for them. And then the opposite attitude to that is anger, hatred, aversion towards people, things that we find unattractive, threatening. They seem to be a cause of our suffering, so we want to push them away or even harm them, destroy them, and so on. So it's also sometimes said that there are three poisons, three main causes of suffering: ignorance, attachment, and hatred. Those are called the three poisons, or the three, maybe a more modern term would be toxins. Often people are concerned about toxins in their body and wanting to get, rid of the toxins, clear away the toxins in their body. But we have these toxins in our mind, mental toxins, these disturbing emotions, mainly ignorance and attachment and hatred. And then when our mind is under the influence of one or more of these disturbing thoughts, disturbing emotions, then what happens is we do actions. We create karma. Karma literally means action. So when we do actions, when we act with our body, doing physical things, with our speech, speaking, and even just with our mind, with our thoughts. So anytime our actions are motivated by one or more of these disturbing emotions, then this becomes what we call bad karma, non-virtuous karma, negative karma. And that karma, if it's not purified, if we don't manage to clear it up, to purify it, to clear it away, then it will ripen sometime later in the form of painful experiences, unpleasant experiences. So this is the evolution of how suffering comes about, where our suffering comes from. It starts with these disturbing emotions in our mind, which take over, motivate our actions, and then the actions, the karma, in turn, bring about these painful experiences, suffering. So now let's look a little bit more carefully in detail at how this works. With regard to ignorance, the Sanskrit term for ignorance is avidya, and in Tibetan it's marikpa, and literally it means not knowing. You know, both of these terms mean not knowing, but it isn't just. It's not necessarily just not knowing in that, like, for example, let's say I don't know Danish. Okay, so I can't speak Danish language, but probably most of you do. So I'm just like ignorant of that. But in this case, when we're talking about ignorance, the real cause of suffering is more than just not knowing, but it's a kind of active misknowing, a misconceiving of the way things exist. Okay, so it's a little bit more of an active rather than a passive not knowing. And in general, there's many different kinds of ignorance. There's lots of different things we can be ignorant of. But in this context, when we're talking about the, ignorance that leads to suffering, there's two that are more important. One is ignorance of karma, ignorance of the law of cause and effect. And then the second is the ignorance of the true nature of things. So with the first one, this is easier to deal with because we can just gain the knowledge, the understanding about karma. And as long as we can accept what the Buddha taught about karma, we don't kind of fight against it and resist it. If we can accept what he taught, then we can put it into practice and try to live our lives in such a way that we avoid creating bad karma and try to create good karma as much as we can. But so the ignorance of karma involves not knowing and not understanding what kind of actions lead to happiness and which kind of actions lead to suffering. So just to give an example, there are lots of people in the world who think that killing animals is a good thing to do, an okay thing to do, and even a source of happiness, a source of pleasure. They like to go hunting and fishing and whatever, catching butterflies and sticking them to boards. And so, and they don't see anything wrong with this kind of action, and they may even experience happiness and pleasure when they do them. So this is an example of this type of ignorance, because they don't see what's really going on here. They probably don't realize that they are causing suffering for the animals that they're killing. I mean, sometimes people think animals don't have feelings, and so they're not really suffering when they are killed, when they're hunted and caught with a fishing line and so on. So they're ignorant of that, they're unaware of that. And they also don't realize that they're creating suffering for themselves, that they're leaving imprints on their own mind, which if no antidotes are applied to remove them, will be the cause for themselves to experience suffering in the future. So the karma of killing is said to be one of the worst kind of karma that we can create. The sufferings that it leads to are really, really terrible. So that's one example, but the same goes for other kinds of actions: stealing, cheating, misappropriating funds, not paying taxes, telling lies, sexual misconduct, and so on. So according to the Buddhist teachings, these kind of actions are actually the cause of suffering. But some people don't see that, and they engage in these actions thinking they're enjoying themselves and just unaware that they're actually creating suffering for themselves and others. So that's one kind of ignorance that we need to clear up, and we need to realize that we, with the actions that we do, we are creating the causes for results, for consequences that we will experience in the future. And also even in an immediate sense, you know, the actions that we do can lead to consequences right now for ourselves and for others. So it's important to wake up to this, to realize this, to look carefully at this. And if we can accept this, we can see the truth of this, then really try our best to not do those actions that lead to suffering, and instead do actions that lead to happiness and liberation and enlightenment. And then the second main type of ignorance is ignorance about the true nature of things, the ultimate nature of things. And this is much more difficult to understand. And it's also complicated because there are different schools of Buddhist philosophy, and the different schools explain the true nature of things differently, which we're going to look at in the next module. The next module, we're going to look at the true truths, and look a little bit at how the true truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, are explained differently by different schools, just within Buddhism, within the teachings of the Buddha. But you're probably, if you have been exposed to, you know, Tibetan Buddhist teachings, most of the Tibetan traditions follow the Madhyamika Prasangika school. They regard that as the most correct way of asserting conventional and ultimate truth. And so according to that school, as I mentioned earlier, that's the school that talks about emptiness as being the true nature of all things, of our own self and our bodies and our minds and everybody else and everything else in the world around us. So all things, the true nature, the ultimate nature of everything is that it's empty of inherent existence, of real, independent, inherent existence. And this is not easy to understand. It really takes quite a bit of time and study and meditation to really understand it. But it's just in a simple way, what it means is that when we see an object or think of an object or encounter an object in any way, the object appears as if it's got its own real, solid way of existing. You know, like it's really there from its own side. There's a real thing there. Almost like it's shouting out at us, calling out at us, saying, I'm here, I exist. And it seems to be completely independent, existing on its own, not depending on anything else for its existence. So another way of talking about this is independent existence. Things seem to have an independent or autonomous way of existing. And this is how everything appears to us. And normally we just go along with it. We just buy into it and just act our whole life, you know, live our whole life on the basis of this view that everything has inherent independent existence, including ourself. You know, we feel like I have this real inherent existence, and everybody else, my friends, my enemies, and everybody else that exists also exists in that same way. And everything, all the things in the world and all the things that happen, you know, also, you know, exist in this very real, inherent, independent way. So according to this school of philosophy, that's ignorance. That's the real ignorance that sees things as existing in this way, this inherent, independent way, which is totally not true, totally false, totally fabrication of the mind. So this is regarded as the root cause, the real root of all of our suffering. Because as long as we're caught up in this state of mind of, you know, seeing and believing that everything exists in this real, intrinsic, inherent, independent way, then other things arise from that, other attitudes. For example, we feel like I'm a real me, and I'm really here, and I'm really important. I'm the center of the universe. So we become very self-centered, very obsessed with ourselves. And then we look out at the world and we see other people and we see things, and some of them we like. You know, we find them, oh yeah, I like that one, I like that thing. That makes me happy, that makes me feel good. I want them. I want to keep them close to me. So then we develop attachment, grasping, craving, clinging to that particular part of the world. Again, people, things, objects, events. And then there are other people and things and objects and events that we react to in the opposite way. We feel, I don't like those. They annoy me, irritate me, they're ugly, they're unattractive, they're make me feel bad. I don't want them around. So we want to push them away or stay away from them. We might even go to the extent of wanting to harm them or kill them or destroy them because we find them so horrible, so despicable. So that's how ignorance gives rise to the other two poisons of attachment on the one hand and anger or hatred or aversion on the other hand. And so this is like our basic situation, you know, seeing things as really existing and then getting caught up in attachment and aversion, craving and hatred. And then these states of mind in turn motivate our actions. And some of the actions that we do motivated by these states of mind become non-virtuous actions like killing, stealing, lying, cheating, being abusive, and so forth. And then having done those actions, we leave, whenever we do any of those actions, and some kind of imprint is left on our mind, which will be the cause of suffering in the future. It causes being born in unfortunate existences and then having various kinds of suffering and so on. Of course, it's possible to purify karma. Karma is not something fixed. Once you do something negative, that's it. You have no choice but to experience its results. It's not like that. We can purify karma, but not everybody knows how to do that. Not everyone does that. So if karma isn't purified, then it will lead to unpleasant results. And so this is actually one place we can start to work on reducing the causes of suffering, which is why the Buddha taught this in the first place. He wanted to point out to us what are the causes of suffering so that we can at least start to stop creating the causes of suffering and start creating the causes of happiness. So of the two causes of suffering, delusions or disturbing states of mind and karma, karma is easier to work on. It's easier to work on our actions of body and speech, our physical actions, our verbal actions. It's easier to learn to not do those, to refrain from those, than it is to work on the mind. It's much harder to stop the mind, you know, harder to stop our thoughts from, you know, being angry and hateful and so on. But we can at least stop our mouth from saying angry, hateful, hurtful words. It's easier, relatively easier. Some of you may not agree with me. But anyway, so the Buddha pointed out the 10 non-virtuous actions that are the heaviest, the worst, that you know, if we want to stop creating the causes of suffering, we try to avoid these. So do any of you remember what these are? Or any of them? The 10 non-virtues?
Not killing.
Divisive speech, idle chatter.
Okay, we got 3. Well, usually they start with the body, physical action. So killing is 1. What's another one?
Wrong speech.
No, that's speech. Stealing. Okay, that's a physical action, stealing. And then a third one?
Sexual misconduct.
Sexual misconduct, which mainly refers to any kind of sexual activity that causes suffering, like rape or child abuse, incest, and so on. Adultery, actually, they do mention adultery, because if you two people are in a relationship committed to each other, and then one of them gets involved with the third person, then that can cause suffering to the other one. So that usually causes suffering too. So those are the three of the body: killing, stealing, and then sexual misconduct. Then for the speech, you mentioned
Divisive speech.
divisive speech is one, and idle chatter,
Lie.
lying.
Wrong speech.
Passwords.
Okay, lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, and idle gossip or idle talk. Those are the four of speech. Yeah. And then there's three more of mind, three actions of the mind.
Wrong view. Ill will.
Ill will, yeah.
Covetousness.
Covetousness, right. So that's, covetousness is when we want things that belong to other people, and we start planning, plotting ways of getting them for ourselves. And ill will is work, mental activity that's planning to hurt somebody. Like if you're plotting a murder or plotting a torture, or, you know, thinking about how you can hurt somebody, how you can cause suffering to somebody. That's ill will. And then wrong view is, so in the Buddhist context, wrong view would involve, mainly it involves rejecting things that are important and necessary for our spiritual practice. So for example, if you don't believe in karma, if you say there's no such thing as karma, you can do whatever you want, there won't be any consequences. So rejecting the idea of karma would be a wrong view in the context of Buddhism, because it's very important to accept that karma does exist. The actions that we do lead to results that we will experience in the future. So that's a very important view to hold. Another would be rejecting the possibility of attaining enlightenment or attaining liberation. If you say there's no such thing as enlightenment, no such thing as liberation, you know, nobody can get out of suffering. We're going to be in this situation forever. So that would be another type of wrong view, because if you really believe that, you wouldn't even make effort to try to change things, to improve yourself, to get out of suffering. You just kind of stay where you are. Okay, so if we have difficulty refraining from all of those, we just do the best we can, you know. And they say start with the strongest or the grossest or the heaviest, you know, like killing. Killing is the heaviest kind of negative karma. So try to start by not killing, you know, learning to not kill, and then gradually work on the more subtle ones. And it's really just trying to do it, you know. The Buddha knows that we're just ordinary beings, and we're not enlightened beings, and we're not perfect, and we make mistakes, and is always forgiving and caring, and, you know, doesn't get angry. So if we do make a mistake and tell a lie or steal something, you know, it's not that the Buddha is going to be angry at us and punish us. But we just try the best we can. And then there's always the practice of purification. We can purify karma that's created. And then in the teachings on karma, it's mentioned that when we do an action, create a complete karma, a fully complete action, there are three results. One is called the ripened result. Sometimes it's called the throwing result. And this refers to the type of rebirth that we will have as a result of doing an action. So if we commit any of the 10 non-virtuous actions and don't purify it, then the result of that will be a rebirth in an unfortunate situation, like an animal, hungry ghost, and so on. So that's the ripened result. And then other types of results. A second is a result similar to the cause, and that has two aspects. So as the name means, as the name implies, having done an action, we will experience certain results that are similar to the action that we did. And this has two parts. One is an experience that is similar to the cause. So, for example, if we killed somebody, then later on we will have the experience of being killed or having a short life or having a lot of illness. So we have some experience that's similar to what we did, the kind of action that we did, the kind of suffering that we caused to somebody else or to other beings will be the receiving end of that same type of suffering. And then the other part of this result similar to the cause is action similar to the cause. So this is actually the worst of the results of karma. It says that we will have the tendency to keep doing the same action again and again and again. So if you kill, it's like you're setting up this momentum, this tendency to kill again. Once you do it once, it becomes easier to do it again and again. You can see that also in one lifetime. Without thinking about future lives, but even in one lifetime, having done it once, it's like it can become a habit. If you're not really careful and don't stop yourself, then it can become a habit, almost like an addiction, an obsession. Okay, so that's another result. And they say this is the worst one because it means that then we keep creating that same karma. We keep creating more and more and more suffering for ourselves. And then there's the environmental result, the third type of result, environmental result. And that refers to being born in a particular situation. So with regard to killing, it said that we could be born in a place where there's a lot of war, violence, anger, or very unhealthy conditions. Like food and medicine are not really healthy. There's a lot of disease. It's very barren, maybe, not enough food to eat and so on. So very unpleasant, very difficult environment could be the result of killing. Anyway, this is just to give an example of how an action that we do, like killing, which is in turn motivated by delusions, afflictive emotions, ignorance, greed, hatred, and so on, becomes the cause of suffering. So it explains how suffering arises from its causes, disturbing emotions, and karma. So you probably heard this explanation before. It's in the Lamrim, but it's important to really understand it well, because it means that if we're not careful about what goes on in our mind, we're not careful about our actions of body and speech and so on, then we might be creating the causes of suffering for ourselves and also for others. And there's another way of explaining the evolution of suffering, how suffering comes about, which is in terms of the 12 links of dependent origination. That's a rather complicated topic, but I think we'll do it later, not now. In the last module of this program, we'll go through the stages of the path, the Lamrim, and so that will be a good opportunity, a good time to look at the 12 links.
Could it be time for a tea break, perhaps?
What?
Time for a tea break.
Time for a tea break. Okay, good time to break, yeah. So let's have 10 minutes break.
We have to say something about it. If people want to put contribution to Lama Zopa's, what is it, Martin?
Martin is not here.
For long life puja, Lama Zopa, there will be a long life puja for Lama Zopa. But isn't it also to contribution to what we want to give him as a gift? Yeah. So if somebody wants to do that, I think the red ones for that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so just to explain, there will be a long life puja for Lama Zopa Rinpoche in Singapore next month, 13th of March, and all the different centers of the FPMT are invited to participate in that. So Martin and Marie are actually going to the puja, and then they're going to offer something to Rinpoche on behalf of all the students in Denmark. And we had the idea of offering Rinpoche, I don't know how to say this, but make a donation to a charitable cause, and then do that in Rinpoche's name and offer that to Rinpoche. So they decided to offer money to, what is it?
To Kvindernes Hjem. To the home at the
Homeless-
here for homeless
women.
in
Yeah.
Copenhagen.
Okay. And so anyone who would like to contribute to that offering, which will go to the homeless shelter, but then it will also be dedicated for Rinpoche's long life. So it's a way of creating lots of good energy. Okay, so let's have a break, 10-minute break.
Some tea, maybe you can enjoy it at home.
I have some of this. I do have some.
Yeah, don't you like it?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's very nice.
Because then you don't are not awake all the time. If you drink too much tea. then
Yeah, that's true. Too much caffeine isn't good. Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
So how about we do a little bit of meditation on what I was talking about earlier, just to try to have a better and deeper understanding of the origin of suffering, the cause of suffering. So first, make yourself comfortable, but try to keep your back straight to help the mind be more clear and focused. Try to keep your body relaxed, so let go of any tension you may have anywhere in your body. Let your breathing come in and go out in a natural way. Let your mind settle down. Make sure you have a state of mind that's in the present, not thinking about the past or the future, wandering away, but just staying right here, right now, on the meditation that we're doing. So now bring to mind some action that you did in the past. It could be in the recent past, or it could be long ago when you were much younger. Some action that was unwise, unskillful, what would be considered in Buddhism and in other religions as something negative, something non-virtuous, like hurting somebody or killing some animal or insect or stealing or lying. So when you remember this action that you did, you might feel guilty, but understand that feeling guilty isn't really useful. And it's also not really part of the Buddhist practice. Buddhists, for example, Tibetans, they don't even have the word for guilt. So they don't seem to feel guilty about things that they do. Instead, they feel regret, and they try to purify and refrain from doing those actions again in the future. So I'm just saying this to help you not get caught up in feelings of guilt. And it can also be helpful to understand that doing an action, like an unskillful or unvirtuous action, is itself dependent on other factors, causes and conditions. So the explanation in Buddhism is that basically deep down inside of us, we have ignorance that doesn't understand the true nature of things and instead sees things in a mistaken way. So we have a mistaken sense of our own self or I, believing that we exist in a very real, solid way, which in fact isn't true. So we have a distorted sense of ourself, our I. And then when it comes to other people and other beings and things in the world around us, we also see those in a mistaken way, as much more real and solid than they really are. So it's like our whole perception of everything, ourself and others and events, and is all mistaken, as though we are living in a dream, living in a cloud, not seeing things as they really are. And so it's within this cloudy, confused state of mind that we get caught up in emotions like anger or jealousy or attachment, and then in turn get motivated to do unskillful actions. And this whole situation isn't really our fault. It isn't that we choose to be this way, that we decided to be this way, but it's because we could say we inherited these mistaken states of mind, ignorance and other delusions from our previous lives. So they were already there in our mind when we were born, because they were there in our mind in past lives as well. So that's why it's not appropriate to feel guilty, because it's not really our fault. It's not really our choice to be the way that we are. So we have ignorance, confusion, not seeing things in a realistic way. Then under the influence of ignorance, we get caught up in other disturbing emotions like anger, attachment, greed, and so on. And then we act under the influence of these disturbing states of mind. And the actions we do become the cause for future suffering. So just spend some time contemplating that, see if you can understand how this works, how there's this step-by-step cause and effect evolution or process where how suffering comes into existence. And then if we are able to accept this explanation and wish to do something about it, that's definitely possible. One place we can start is by trying our best to not create negative actions, non-virtuous actions like killing and stealing and so forth. And another thing we can do is to try to work on our mind, our disturbing emotions. So when anger comes up, or attachment, or jealousy, or any of the disturbing emotions, there are antidotes, things we can use to work on reducing those or changing our mind so that we don't feel angry and instead feel patient or even loving and compassionate. And then the real solution, the ultimate solution, is to work on ignorance, to overcome ignorance. That's more difficult to do, but we can at least start by trying to develop a better understanding of emptiness, selflessness, the true nature of things. And even making a little bit of effort towards that is very helpful for reducing our ignorance. So see if you can come to the conclusion in this meditation that you would like to at least start in whatever way you can, at whatever level you can, start to work on reducing the causes of suffering so that you aren't creating so many of these, you're not creating so much suffering for yourself and for others. Okay, so then you can slowly come out of the meditation, relax, open your eyes. So there's one kind of related topic, or more of a question that sometimes comes up with regard to what we call disturbing emotions or delusions or afflictions in Buddhism, for example, anger, hatred, greed, jealousy, and so on. Are these necessarily the cause of suffering? Are these sort of, the way they're normally explained is that they are like in the nature of being harmful, being disturbing, like from their own side. They really like that. And sometimes this leads to questions and discussion, especially from the point of view of Western psychology, which doesn't necessarily have the same viewpoint. Some of these, what Buddhism would consider disturbing emotions are not considered to be so in Western psychology. So, so what do you think? Do you think that the emotions like anger or attachment, jealousy, and so forth, that these are always necessarily disturbing, harmful, the cause of suffering? Do you have any ideas, any opinions on that?
A moment of intensity of any of these emotions can make something very clearly observable. So, now I see, now I can apply an antidote.
So you're saying when they arise, we can see them very clearly, and then we can work on them, apply antidote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity of recognition and saying, this is what anger looks like.
Yeah.
This is what the self has, the cherishing mind has, this is how it manifests in this situation. And now I can really get to know it and transform it. There's an opportunity of transformation.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I find that too. Because if we're just trying to like avoid them or shove them under the carpet, bury them, or pretend they're not there, then that's not helpful. They don't go away by themselves. So if we are willing to acknowledge, there's anger, or there's attachment, or there's jealousy, and kind of face it, confront it, and deal with it, then it can be very, very, very juicy, very useful. To really understand better what the Buddha is talking about, and also to be able to understand other people, because everybody has these emotions, and if you're always trying to avoid them in yourself and not learn how to work with them, how to deal with them, then you won't be very good at helping other people who are caught up in these emotions. So the more you can really face them and work on them and deal with them in yourself and learn skillful ways of working with them, then the better you'll be able to help others who are going through difficult emotions. So that's one. Yeah. And feel compassion, yes. You know what it's like. You know what it's like to feel angry. So you can have compassion when somebody else is angry.
Well, as long as we're living in this relative reality and we're not enlightened, I think it's very useful to be able to know when somebody has done something wrong, to harmful towards you, and be able to react somehow. And you can call that anger or self-defense, or I think we need to be able to harness some sort of power. Then if you get caught up in that and you're thinking about it constantly and so forth, obviously it's not useful. But as a sort of a response, here's my line, don't step over that, or there will be a consequence, I think, especially for us spiritual types. I think the doormat syndrome can be very
Write it on the doormat. Watch out on the spiritual. Very good idea.
Yeah.
Jealousy, I'm not so sure about. It's never really useful, but anyway.
Well, except as Joseph said, if it's there, it's much better to face it. And, if it's coming up in your mind, to say, aha, there's jealousy. Oh, that's interesting. And let's learn about this and work with this. And then that puts you in a more knowledgeable state where you can help others. You're more able to help others with the same kind of problem.
And also, all emotions are transformative somehow, right? Like
They're all what?
Are transformative.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody dies, you really need to have that great big sobbing cry and be really sad for a while to get over it, and it actually works.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes the traditional Buddhist teachings make it sound as though, we shouldn't have these emotions. They're bad. They're, unspiritual. If you're a spiritual person, you're following the path, then you shouldn't feel these emotions. Part of that might be cultural, might be a cultural thing. There's a very good book it's over here by Rob Priest called Feeling Wisdom, where he's dealing with this very issue, looking at, because he's a Jungian psychologist, and he teaches here sometimes. So he's looking at this whole subject of emotions according to Buddhism and according to Western psychology, and kind of comparing those two approaches. And he mentioned in there one Tibetan Lama who said to his disciples something about how we shouldn't take our emotions so seriously. I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, and I've heard this from other sources as well, that among Tibetans, in Tibetan culture, they don't have this habit of asking each other, how are you feeling? Do you do that in Danish? You ask people, how do you feel? How are you? Yeah. So it's like we put a lot of importance on feelings. How are you feeling today? Yeah. But they don't do that. Tibetans don't do that. They don't ask each other, and they don't talk about their feelings with each other. It's just not part of their culture. And this Lama was saying, because feelings are so fickle, they're so changeable. In the morning you might be feeling great, in the afternoon feeling lousy, or vice versa. So because they're impermanent and changing, and what's the point in talking about them? I guess that's the reasoning behind it. But anyway, we do have that tradition of paying attention to our feelings, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it can be very useful, because feelings do exist, and if they're ignored, if they're not given attention and not dealt with in a healthy way, then they can grow and become worse and lead to other kinds of problems. So anyway, I tend to think that emotions in themselves, even anger, isn't necessarily bad, isn't necessarily harmful, isn't necessarily a cause of suffering. It's more a question of how you work with it, how you deal with it. And it could even be a source of wisdom, working with it can help you to have more wisdom, help you have more compassion. So it's like there are more and less wise, skillful ways of working with emotions.
The suffering of emotions can be a tendency to be attached to those emotions, because for some reason I want to keep my anger, I want to keep my sorrow, because this is what I know best, and it's an exciting energy, or it's an energy which keeps me in a state of being. Because I hear very many people, my pain, my anger, my this, my that, and they don't want to give it up.
It's who they are. It's who I am. If I didn't have all these emotions, I wouldn't exist. maybe that's what's going on there. Identifying with emotions. Yeah. Did you want to say something else?
Well, no.
Oh,
You just did it, I think. Yeah.
you had your hand up, or you're trying to?
I was thinking about, because here we are talking in one side about emotions, but also we talk about karma. Well, in your presentation,
Mm-hmm.
you presented karma, and then and then I thought, is karma presented, for example, in the sutra about the Four Noble Truths?
Is karma what?
Presented in together with the Four Noble Truths originally?
Doesn't seem to be.
I don't know.
Kind of indirectly, when the Buddha talks later, he talked about the Eightfold Path.
No, okay. Yeah.
And there he's talking about how he mentions that right action, right speech, and so on. So that is implying karma, that we refrain from unskillful or negative actions and do positive ones instead.
Yeah. Because for me, it's much more manageable to think about emotions and how they affect my life and the way I relate to others and the quality of my mind and the quality of my relations. But then karma is something you have to believe. You have to take it by word. You cannot.
You can't see it.
You cannot see it.
Yeah.
In a way, because you also mentioned that it's easier to think to take the karma approach than the emptiness approach, when I think I don't know.
Not for you.
Because emptiness, I have to work hard, but hopefully get some understanding and
Yeah.
with karma until
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, karma, the way karma is explained is often very, very elaborate and complicated and all these little details. But one time Lama Yeshe gave a teaching on karma, and he said that we can actually, it is difficult with all the details of karma, but he said we can actually see karma in our own experience. For example, if we wake up in the morning and you're in a bad state of mind, you're feeling angry and impatient and negative and so on. If you have that state of mind and then you go into your day with that state of mind and you start doing things and interacting with people and so on, what kind of experiences are you going to have? Right? Probably lousy ones. On the other hand, if you wake up in the morning and you're in a good state of mind, you're really feeling good and happy and positive, and you love yourself, you love your life, you love the world, and you go into your day with that state of mind, what kind of experiences are you going to have?
Yeah.
So he says you don't have to think about past lives and future lives to see how karma works. You can see it just in one day, just in your own, how the way you are, the way you act, how that brings about results and consequences, even in an immediate sense.
Yeah.
So that's karma too.
Sense,
Yeah. I mean, usually it's explained in a more long-term way. You do this today, and next lifetime or 1,000 years from now, something's going to happen to you. That's very difficult to feel certain about. But if you look at it the way Lama Yeshe spoke, then it's easier to see.
Yeah, and in that sense, and that's what I mentioned. When we talk about emotions and whether they're constructive or not constructive, yeah, that I can observe in my own experience. But then, you read the Wheel of Sharp Weapons and you think, well, how much culturalism is it? Should I have to take it literally?
Yeah,
or
you have to take a lot on faith.
Or is there some skillfulness there? It's been written in that way that people. Yeah.
Do you want to ask your question?
Sure, I can ask my question. Like we talked about during the break, my question was around the 4 characteristics of the truth of suffering. And in particular, in the Mahayana tradition, talking about emptiness and selflessness. And if that exists and the Atman does not really, what is exactly reincarnated in the Mahayana tradition?
It's not just Mahayana, also in the Theravada tradition. They may not emphasize it as much, but it's definitely there. The Buddha did talk about reincarnation in the Theravada tradition, the Pali Canon. Anyway, yeah, this is a big question, and there's a lot of discussion about it. How, on the one hand, Buddhism says there's no permanent self or soul or Atman, but on the other hand, there's reincarnation and there's continuation from one life to the next. Like you do something in one lifetime and then, later on, next life or some other life, there will be results. So how does that work in the context of selflessness? So there are different explanations in different schools, different schools of philosophy, but usually the explanation is that our mind, our consciousness, doesn't stop existing when our body does. So our body dies, it stops breathing, stops working, and death, according to Buddhism, is the point at which our mind, our consciousness, separates from our body. So while we're alive, there's this mind, we call it mind or consciousness, but it's actually a stream. It's like a constantly changing, flowing stream of mental energy. So that's connected with our body during our life. When we die, it separates from our body. And in the Tibetan tradition, especially in the tantric tradition, there's a whole explanation of the process of dying, different stages that you go through as death happens and as this mind separates from the body. But anyway, the final end of our life, the mind separates from our body and then goes off, and depending on our karma, depending on the state of mind we have at the end of our life, then we'll take another life, another body. So it's the mind, the consciousness. But that doesn't mean the mind with all of our experiences of this life. It's more like a very reduced, very subtle level of the mind that shoots off.
Like a vibration.
Vibration. Well, yeah, when it comes to the mind, it's quite complex. There's many different aspects of the mind, different levels of the mind, and anyway, they say a very subtle level of the mind, a subtle level of the consciousness is what separates from our physical body and takes rebirth. But it carries with it the karma that we created during our life. So it's like the actions that we do, the karma we do during our life leave kind of like imprints, footprints or handprints, not physically, of course, but like that in the mind. And then those go to the next life and they become the cause for the experiences of the next life, where we're born, what kind of experiences we have, and so on. So, and the mind is not a soul, not an Atman, because the idea of a soul or an Atman is like some kind of person or personality, like who we are now in this lifetime. We tend to think, well, that is going to the next life. That is going to heaven or hell or, rebirth or whatever. But it's not like that. It's just this kind of stripped down, basic consciousness, this basic energy of mind that goes to the next life, and then it finds itself in a new body, develops a whole new personality, a whole new sense of I, and a whole bunch of experiences and so forth. I remember when I was a kid, I was raised a Catholic, and we went to Catholic schools, and we'd have these little books teaching us, catechism, basic Catholic doctrine, and they'd have these pictures of, people, they die and then they go to heaven and they look just like they did while they were, same body, same shape. Also the movies, in the movies when they have a ghost, when there's a ghost, the ghost looks just like the ghost of me would look just like me, same shape, same, everything, features, but just transparent, transparent and invisible, just like me. So that's just maybe in the popular imagination, this is what the soul is, that which goes on, that lives on after death. So Buddhism is not like that. But it's very hard to understand this point. It's quite tricky, quite subtle. Okay, so we'll stop there for tonight. We'll carry on next week. Next week we'll go on to the other two truths. And I did prepare some notes for tonight, but I didn't finish them until the afternoon. So Martina probably emailed them to you, but maybe you didn't get them in time. Did any of you get them or no? Okay. So I'll try to have them ready more promptly next week. Okay, so let's finish by dedicating. So we have some dedication prayers. The last 2 pages of this. So this is to dedicate the merit, the positive energy of coming together and listening, thinking about, meditating on these teachings with a good motivation, wanting to benefit others as well as ourselves, wanting to help all of us get closer to enlightenment. So let's dedicate this positive energy for that same goal, to help everyone reach enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, thank you. So it's probably better to keep these here, right? So that we have them for next week.
If you could pass them around so you can have it. And then I'll discuss.
Hvis I gerne vil modtage, så kan jeg prøve, så ligger der i det, jeg får her. Hvis vi modtager det.